Okay. So each of the dimensions is inflated with a frequency, 12 frequency bands. And if you remember, I said that each frequency band encompasses, in our situation, all of the frequencies that we experience in the physical universe. So a dimension and a tritove component and a frequency band equal a permutation of space. So it can't move up to the next level unless it's able to ascend the frequencies in its dimension, its frequency of domicile. So what does that mean to us? We talk about ascension, we talk about different areas of high frequency. But if you use this example of frequency space, if we consider this line down here as being the middle of a base frequency, and these peaks up here as being the top end of the torrents, and the peaks down here, the troughs down here as being the bottom end of the torrents, then you can see that there's lots of potential evolutionary and devolutionary activity upon this particular plane of frequency space. Now these areas here, where there's not a lot going on, will be areas where entities are working together and their evolutionary content is being negated by bad things or good things, or areas where they've worked well, but in areas where they've not worked well negates the upward movement. But these other areas here show where entities are working well together and they're evolving as a result of it. Similarly, entities down here may not be working so well, and they may be rampaging around their particular universe, warring with each other and causing all sorts of merry hell. So it's interesting. But what's more interesting is that these areas here are areas for ascension or descension. And this next image gives you an example of that. If we were to take a two-dimensional view of that frequency space and think that actually we've got 4 dimensions here, or so four frequencies here, then an entity that's existing in the top end of its frequency space may well have an opportunity to ascend to the next frequency upwards if the lower end of that frequency is is quite close to the upper end of the lower frequency. And this is because the frequencies undulate. Okay? One of the speakers yesterday talked about twitters and sudden portals appearing where we can see different realities or different points in time. Those are different areas of higher frequency where things start to break down based upon the physicality. And what the source entities told me is that an entity, and we use these two areas here, who is highly evolved in a lower frequency, may well ascend to the next frequency level up if it's in contact with the lower content of that higher frequency. So you can see where an entity might evolve and ascend as a result of the interaction, where there's areas of frequency touching each other, which is quite interesting, because otherwise you've got to do it via mechanical means. Now we talk about ascension and descension, and we talk about being incarnate, but the movement into the lower frequencies affects us quite significantly. And the source entity gave me an illustration of what happens to us as entities moving into the lower frequencies. And that also is relevant to our condition when we move into the incarnate state, because we're right down at the rock bottom. And it said if we consider ourselves to be equal to all of the information on the World Wide Web, that includes everything in PCs, and that part of us that's incarnate is equivalent to being a laptop computer. And then we consider the amount of memory space we've got on the hard drive of that computer. There's no way it can go anywhere near taking on board any of the massive amount of information in totality that's on the World Wide Web. That's us energetically. That's us right now. And the communication medium that goes between us gets smaller and smaller and smaller, or less and less capable as we move down to lower frequencies. So our opportunity to communicate with our higher selves gets less and less and less as we go down. So another good example is when we're energetic, we might have 5 million senses. We've got 5 here. So how the hell are we supposed to understand what's going on with ourselves? And then we look at ourselves and we go, okay, let's imagine we're a computer and I want to get information off the World Wide Web. We use Google or we use Yahoo. We only get what we ask for. We ask a question. I want to know where the local Walmart is. And it'll tell you where the local Walmart is. That's all you get. And that is the same with spiritual people, with mediums, with channelers like myself. You only get what you ask for, unless you ask, and if you ask different questions, you get more information. But we're limited to our capability. And this gives you an idea of how limited we are, because it's spiritual individuals who are using mediumship or channeling to access information. You've only got the capability of a search engine, to be honest, because the information is there is based upon the questions that you ask. But more importantly, we couldn't take, if we tried to understand everything, we don't have the disk space to get everything from the World Wide Web into our heads. We just, as the computer would crash, well, we'd find ourselves in a psychiatric home, I think. So let's look at something else we don't like to talk about, time. Now, one of my communications with the entity called Byron, okay, resulted in a communication on time. And I said, what about this time thing, Byron? And he said, what about it? It doesn't exist. Well, we know that, don't we? And we all talk about time not existing, but it's a favourite subject matter of those of us on the earth plane. And he said, but what you experience can be described as holographic event space. That's a bit deep for me, I thought. And he said, this is because events occur in a holographic way, a particular event and all its alternatives can exist and do exist simultaneously, although they are separately. They're separately together. They're there separately, but they're simultaneously experienced. And that means that we can traverse them, okay? We can, by using technology or by using our own evolutionary content, move around the different experiences, the different events. And whilst I was compiling this presentation, I chatted to the Source Entity and I said, how am I going to explain this? And it said, well, think of event space as a rubber band ball. And I stood there and thought, what does he mean, a rubber band ball? And he said, well, think about it. If you think of each rubber band as a closed event, and that each event is wrapped around each other, and that each event is in contact with each other, either directly or indirectly through contact with others, then all of those events can exist consistently. Not only that, all of the different events that are occurring simultaneously as well. So all of the times that I move out of this auditorium, for instance, and I turn right, all the potential events that happen if I turn right can happen simultaneously. Similarly, if I move out and turn left, a whole bunch of different events that can occur are occurring as well. So we can't think of time as linear. It doesn't exist linearly. It exists as events. So I'm going to try and not use the word time anymore and use event space. So if you spot me, please forgive me, because it's quite difficult. It's been ingrained in me for quite a long time. So I'm going to summarise now, because there's quite a lot of information to move into. Okay. So an entity has to ascend the frequency's dimension of domicile, where it lives, before it can translate to the next dimension. And our physical existence in the lower frequencies results in a major loss of communication and function in variance to our higher energetic component. We can't do what we used to do in the energy world. And time doesn't exist linearly as we perceive it, or think we perceive it on the Earth. It occurs holographically as events, separate events. And as a result of this, we can perceive it through various different methodologies, or traverse it at will.